Hello, everyone. My name is Jabril Cisse, and today I will be taking us through my presentation on the CrowdStrike outage, a case study in modern disaster recovery failure. All right, and we'll go ahead and we'll jump right in. All right, so a brief overview of the CrowdStrike incident. On July 19th, CrowdStrike released a faulty update to its Falcon sensor for Microsoft Windows. This update did lead to immediate crashes upon boot up of a Windows device, rendering of millions of devices inoperable. So we had many, many devices that were not able to be used um, due to the fact that many large organizations did rely on CrowdStrike for endpoint security. This damage happened pretty quick and spread pretty wide pretty quickly. Um, Very, very critical sectors that we all use today, like healthcare, aviation, so our air travel or our emergency services, 911, our banks, all of those different sectors were affected by this outage, um, making this one of the most disruptive outages in our history. The root cause of this stemmed from a failure to test the sensor update adequately. And when I say test adequately across many, many, many different Windows environments, as we know, Windows is very diverse. The update did conflict with core functions, triggering blue screens, so blank screens, black screens. There was a huge issue with most of these Windows devices. This update was released without going through production level filters because these filters would have then triggered for any issues that were found in these Windows update. Of course, any simulated user environments should have triggered, and since it did not go through those production level filters, those triggers were not caught. Um, and this right here highlighted a systematic weakness in patch testing and deployment protocols. All right, so communication failures. CrowdStrike's communication strategy failed at several key points. Initially, many people believed that Microsoft was to blame for this. The absence of pre-warning, um, mixed messages, all of those things made things worse in terms of this outage. According to the National Disaster Recovery Framework, um, effective communication during crises must be timely, and I agree to that. They should be timely because the more time it takes for communication to go around about an outage or a bad update can cause issues to stem longer than they need to. But this incident did demonstrate a high cost of failing in communicating effectively. Breakdown in roles and coordination. There was no structure here, guys. There was no structured disaster recovery team, so no one was ready for this. Um, And when it came to CrowdStrike and their, customer support, their customer service, of course, with an outage like this, everyone is calling in trying to get support on these Windows devices. So of course, all their service lines were overloaded. Um, and with this, FEMA did stress the importance of having predefined roles. So having someone that is ready um, on standby for these type of issues. um, of course, with our hospitals and our emergency services waiting for support so that they can serve our communities. Um, of course, just the lack of having these recovery teams in place did prolong downtime and put many, many lives at risk. Contingency plans. So this disaster did reveal a absence of a contingency plan for many, many, many different institutions. There were many organizations that had rollback mechanisms for software updates in case of things like this. A lot of other organizations could not even access the cloud, and that's another big issue. Nowadays a lot of these companies do rely on that cloud. Um, but the FDIC did recommend having offline redundancies, so ways to back up or access the system offline in case for anything. important, especially when it comes to healthcare and finance, uh, because just not having that backup planning in place can turn this digital issue into an overall operational issue. Community and organizational impact, um, patient care, like I just said, from patient care to public safety. This issue did directly affect many lives. Um, we know that community-based resilience does play a major role in navigating post-disaster realities, but in this case, both institutions and individuals were caught unprepared, underlining the importance of digital resilience as part of community readiness. What should have been done differently? Perform, establish, simulate, and define. This incident was preventable. I'll say that's the key takeaway from this. This was a very, very much preventable incident. If the multi-environment testing was done, if there were better protocols with simulation, all of this could have been caught. Um, another big thing is communication. So real-time communication protocols, knowing when to communicate when these things happen. Um, and I feel like our stakeholders should be at the forefront of making sure all these things are in place. If I was on CrowdStrike's this recovery team, I would just push for greater decentralization of support and readiness. Make sure it's spread far and wide within the organization. I feel like every industry does need their own tailored protocol that is supported by regional specialists when it comes to this stuff. I feel like drills, should continue to have drills to make sure that these faulty update scenarios are caught and they know when they're coming and they know what to do during the downtime. And then another big thing, that contingency, like we spoke about, that contingency, having that contingency plan is another big key to making sure these issues are caught and taken care of. Lessons that were learned from this, lessons that were learned from Katrina. So just going back to Katrina, Katrina did expose many, many systemic vulnerabilities in our physical infrastructure. Another big thing that was, realized in that situation was the government response, how the government responded to the disaster. This incident did show us how fragile our digital systems are. Nowadays, we have our hackers and they're hacking even more easily now. But there are many lessons definitely to take away from Katrina. Many lessons that we should continue to make sure we are practicing today to make sure if anything like that was to ever happen again, we would be ready. Having those response teams in place and having that pre-crisis communication in place as well. Strategic recommendations. Best thing to avoid any repeat disasters. I think organizations just must think beyond immediate recovery. Things they need to look at recovery in the long term side and, prepare for that. We need to be resilient, plan for the worst, testing it before it happens. The recovery team should be multidisciplinary and proactive. Most of all, we need to view digital infrastructure the same way that we view power and water. Very vital to us. Here are my references for this presentation, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.